Hello, good night. Welcome to Legalize. This is the final program for 2024, the final program in our first year. And tonight we have with us a person who has appeared on the program twice before at the launch, at the very first program in January. He also appeared together with some colleagues from England, but I considered it important to bring her back alone because she now has a very important function on a very important topic for Caribbean people. As we go into the discussion tonight, there'll be more on that. However, before I ask her to introduce herself briefly and before we get into the meat of the matter tonight, I just want to recognize the sponsors of this program: GEL Professional Solutions, Inc., GEM FM carrying the program on FM radio out of Canada, and also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, GTAU.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Good night, Jackie.
Good night.
Great having you.
Good to be back.
Yeah.
I feel like family.
Right. You are family to Legalize, and we are so happy that I feel privileged to have you. Who is Jackie Mckenzie?
Ooh.
In the Grenada context.
Well, in the Grenada context, yes. So I was born in the UK, but my mother's Grenadian. And in the 70s, and it's interesting actually, because the 70s is when the height of changes in British legislation to do with immigration, and which impacts, interestingly, on the Windrush scandal that I've been working on. My family thought they'd had enough of the UK, and so they came to live in Grenada. And we came to live here in 1975. In fact, we were meant to come in 1974, and there were riots in Grenada, and so they then changed their mind. And a year later, when things had settled down, they decided to come. And I went to St. Joseph's Convent for 4 years, and a college called Institute for Further Education, IFE, which got kind of morphed into TAMCC. And when I was doing my O-levels, as they were called then, so the sort of exam you do in your final year of secondary school, the Grenada Revolution happened. And I think I'm very much a product of that. I think it's a period that, despite all its detractors, really laid the basis for some brilliance in Grenada in terms of education and advancement. And we see so many people who came through that era who were enabled to obtain further education when they previously wouldn't have been able to do so, or who were enabled just to think, to meet people, different walks of life, to meet people from various struggles from around the world. And I actually operated as a protocol officer during the revolution, so met all sorts of interesting people, including the Manleys and Orlando Letelier from Chile's wife and so on. So it was a real awakening, I think an awakening. And we went from really not seeing or knowing much. It was pre the days of the current technology where every young person knows absolutely everything because it's at their fingertips, and very few people even had televisions. We were all glued to little transistor radios and things, or we read a lot. But there was this awake. And I think for me, interestingly, coming from a part of Grenada that was very much pro-Gary, coming with family members who were also very pro-Gary, and then all of a sudden there was all this stuff going on. There was a Centre for Popular Education, there was the house building program, there was the work going on for infrastructural development. My own mother worked on primary healthcare projects. She was a nurse, and we just, it just changed the fabric of Grenadian society. And I was part of that. I was in the NWO, the National Women's Organization. I was actually quite unusual because I was also in the student movement too. I think I only got into the National Women's Organization because we had some really formidable women here in Woburn and Woodlands, people like Faye Ogilvie and the late Catherine James. And they just pulled us all in. So even though we were youngsters and really belonged in either the pioneer movement or the student movement, we also got involved in things like militia and also the National Women's Organization. And that was just really a turning point for having belief that with very little you could make change. And I think that is the start, really, for me, of what has essentially been a life of struggle and a quest for justice for people who can't necessarily obtain that justice on their own.
So you attended IFE, you said?
Yes.
Okay, so I know there are many persons in prominent positions in Grenada now. Maybe some reaching the age of retirement now who also attended IFE. So, and I recall, even when I was at school, there was a lot about this IFE because you had Form 6, college Form 6 in different schools, GBSS, high school, PBC, I think McDonald College. So I can imagine all of these young people coming together in the context of a revolution in particular, that in terms of the energy and the intellectual output would have been, I guess, quite impactful.
And it was quite incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And plus we had teachers, not just brilliant teachers from Grenada, but also, there were the internationalists who came and joined the faculty. It was really quite incredible because before I was one of it, so we were the foundation students, and just a few years ago, we celebrated our 40th anniversary. A whole lot of us descended on Grenada and had our 40th anniversary reunion. It was launched in 1979. IFE, yes. But it was, prior to that, we all studied A-levels. Very few people in Grenada did A-levels, sadly, because you know how the society was. Quite entrenched. Going into further education was really only a privilege of very, very small numbers of people. And so you had these tiny sixth forms in like PBC. Convent didn't have one, interestingly. So convent girls went to PBC or GBSS. Yes. And, there were a couple other schools with them, but there were very, very few. And the revolution had this idea, or revolutionary government rather, had this idea to bring people who, I suppose, in one sense, were the people who had the best O-level results, or the people who wanted to study more, because a lot of people actually went abroad. So we all came together, and we were for the first time in meeting, well, interestingly, because convent being a girls' school, it was the first time sitting in a class with boys. So that was quite an interesting experience, when you're 17 years old. But also the first time meeting children from other parts of the country, even, or from schools that you hadn't even heard of, and with their ideas, their different experiences, their own cultures, because we always think of Grenada as a homogenous society, but it isn't. It has different accents and different cultures depending on where you're from. And that melting pot and that quest to do well, so many people were involved in things. People were all those things I mentioned before, like militia, like the Centre for Popular Education, like the house building program, like all the movements, the student movement, the women's movement, and so forth. Almost everybody was involved. I actually can't think of anyone in my circle who wasn't actually involved in some aspect of the revolution. And so much so, I don't know if you recall that the teachers at IFE went on strike. And those of us who were students broke the strike. I don't think I'd break a strike today, mind you. I am a trade unionist, but we broke the strike and we went and taught. And I taught in GBSS, English and history. And I mean, and that was actually organized. I don't actually remember who organized it or how it came about. I just remember doing it. And even now, I meet students who, people I taught for that short period of time who call me Miss. So it was a formidable experience. I think I've understood that what the revolutionary government was trying to do was to bring together its cadre of students who would then get their A-levels, go off to university. A lot of people went to Cuba, but perhaps go off on these scholarships that were being given out by other countries in solidarity, or find opportunities in Grenada. And I suppose become the sort of bureaucratic class of Grenada, the class that would perhaps be like the civil service for Grenada. I think that was its vision of it. But of course, things kind of imploded, and a lot of people went abroad and stayed.
Yes. Okay, so the revolution took place. The revolution ended tragically. You continued your life. You went off to England. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
you have to forgive me, I'm in Grenada. And one of the interesting things about Grenada, I don't know how you all put up with it, is the noise. So there is a ghetto blaster on a car literally outside my house. So that's why I just muted myself. I don't know if you could hear it and whether listeners can hear it, but I apologize. It appears to have gone.
The internet is having some issues. I don't know if you have plugged in or you're using the Wi-Fi direct.
No, I'm using the Wi-Fi direct, but it's okay my end. Are you having, because every now and again you freeze?
Sometimes we have some issues with, you are fuzzy at times. Yeah, okay. Yes, so you went off to England, and or you returned to England, and of course you studied there. What was your first field of study?
Well, interestingly, it wasn't law. My first field of study was journalism and communications. That's what I was interested in when I finished school, and I did that. But I also, so interestingly, there is a thing that if you are British and you are outside of the country for a certain period of time, in order to have gone to university and have gotten it for free, you had to live back in the country for 3 years. So I actually worked for a number of years. I joined the civil service, and then I left and studied journalism and communications. And I didn't study law till several years after that. I think mainly because I was so fascinated by the case that was going on in Grenada that you yourself was a defendant in, the case now known as the Grenada 17 case. But also similarly, there were various human rights cases going on in England and various issues arising from police brutality, stop and search. There'd been a house fire where 14 young Black people had been killed, and some people thought it might have been a racist attack. To this day, no one's ever been convicted of that. And so there were all sorts of things happening around me, both in the UK and both in Grenada, that I started to take an interest in law. And I thought, can I afford to go back to school? And I did. And so law was the second degree that I did.
And your first degree was communications?
Yes.
You did something in the entertainment field also?
No. Entertainment? No.
Entertainment communications or something?
Communications, yeah, mass comm and journalism, yes, but not well, I mean, it has a lot of, so I did modules in film and in photography. So there is that component to the degree, but no. when you say entertainment, I think of myself on a stage, and there was no element of that.
No. Okay. So obviously, given your experience, your grounding in Grenada, your formation, and so obviously, you would have been, that would have drawn you to, I think, the case up to this time now you are most well known for, namely the Windrush struggle.
Yeah.
So if you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So my main area, I'm a human rights lawyer, but my main area of practice is immigration and asylum. And when you're training in England, you have to train across 3 different areas. Well, you used to have to do that. I think things have changed now. I'm so old. But you have to do 3 areas. And I had a training contract at a firm that only did 3 things. It did crime, it did civil liberties, and that's sort of actions against the police, that sort of thing. And then it did immigration. And I really didn't want to do immigration at all. Everyone said to me, oh, all Black people do immigration and it's just about helping people to get visas. Don't go there. And so it was my last seat that I chose. And on my first day there, I encountered a woman who had been brought to the UK from Rwanda following the genocide in Rwanda. And she'd been brought through an agency with the Red Cross, the help of the Red Cross. And this amazing woman walked in with a baby in her arms. And, you know, she had loads and lots of fabric, you know, this long dress, which I think was part of her national dress, but it was huge amounts of fabric. And she was rolling it up and speaking to an interpreter. And then they told us what was going on. And that was day 1 in immigration. And it turned out that she'd been in this refugee camp. She'd been raped in the refugee camp by peacekeeping troops. She'd been tortured. So the marks on her legs that she was showing us and the doctors and everybody else who was in the room, because it was a case conference, were cigarette burns, the result of cigarette burns. And she had contracted HIV and so had the baby. And that baby was the product of the rape. And I just sat there crying and everyone was looking at me bewildered. You know, you can't, I mean, I was a trainee and I was an older trainee because, as I said, law was my second field of study. But, you know, I just stood there crying and left the room. And then when I came back, you know, everyone was really annoyed with me. But I was given that case and I was forced to understand her movements because, you know, the Refugee Convention and all these problems about where you're meant to claim asylum and all that sort of stuff. And so I was forced to do quite a lot of work on understanding what had happened in Rwanda, what her journey had been, what the position of the Hutus and the Tutsis were, how the Red Cross and all these various organizations had gotten involved, then dealing with experts and so forth. And I'd also done a master's degree. I did 2 master's degrees, actually, but I'd done one in international relations and human rights law. And I had done some work on Rwanda as part of my dissertation. So I just then all of a sudden thought, my God, immigration isn't just about helping people to get visas, because I'm not saying that that's not worthy work, but there's so much more to it. And I became fascinated with the area, how you marry the rights of people, the jurisprudence from your domestic law, but also the international conventions, and how that country information, the stuff that really motivates me to understand what moves people, why do people move, what are their experiences, what goes on in a country, all came together. And that was it. I thought, I'm doing immigration. I loved it so much and everyone was shocked. And so I stayed in it. And of course, the Windrush scandal is very much part of an immigration story. People came in the 40s, and there's a whole row about the narrative about the Windrush scandal, because we know that there were African heritage people in the UK for hundreds of years before the Windrush boat ever arrived, you know, and there's evidence of them being involved in all walks of life, even in the royal family, but in militaria, in theology, in scholarship. Of course, the large numbers who were enslaved and working in or enslaved in the UK itself, so not just in the Americas. And so there was this huge presence of people. But the Windrush scandal has its history, and it's an important history because it is the start of mass migration from the Caribbean. About 500,000 people, so first and second generation, come as a result of that first or second, because there was actually a boat before the Windrush boat, the Ormerand. So the 500,000 people from the Caribbean moved to the UK as a result of this Windrush story. So although it does in some way cause some complications when people start talking about Black migration to the UK. It's not accurate. It is an important history that needs to be acknowledged. And so, of course, when people arrived, there was a sort of callousness. In fact, the British government never really expected them to stay, the people who were coming. They just wanted our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents to come over and do some donkey work and help with the post-war reconstruction, because Britain was in a bad way. Didn't want anyone to stay. And in fact, when the boat arrived and docked at Tilbury on the 21st of June, 1948, 11 Labour MPs, Labour Party MPs. Now, we always think of Labour as being more sort of, benevolent towards migrants. Well, anyway, 11 Labour MPs wrote to the then Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, and said, we don't want these people here, effectively. And that's why Windrush Day is celebrated on the 22nd of June, because he took a day to think about it. And those people were on the boat overnight whilst he was thinking about it. And when you do the research and you look at all the telexes and stuff that were going backwards and forwards, he was contemplating sending the people on the Windrush boat, free men and women, 1948, not 1848, free men and women who'd bought their ticket to come to the UK, basically because they thought they were coming to another part of their own motherland. The idea of being a British subject in their mind meant they were British, thought they were coming home, effectively, and were being denied that opportunity. And he was going to, or was planning to, send them to East Africa to work on a peanut plantation, would you believe? Absolutely incredible history there. But nevertheless, he saw sense and told his MPs to see sense, and those people disembarked the following day, and the rest is history. There's a whole lot of us. Myself, I'm second generation. My parents came, my dad came on one of those boats, the Georgic, in 1951 from Jamaica. My mother came a few years after that by the BOAC plane, because by then the people started coming by flights. And I was born in the UK, and my brother. So we're second generation. So we're part of that Windrush story. So because I was an immigration lawyer, when the scandal broke, we realized this is what we'd been talking about for years. And I run a training seminar for the CARICOM High Commissioners. And I'd done one in 2014 and one in 2015. And we were querying, why is it that all these Caribbean elders who'd been here for so long have to pay all this money to naturalize as British citizens or to get evidence of their right to be in the UK through a no time limit stamp? It's just a process, to bore people about process. And then the Dominican High Commissioner, acting Dominican High Commissioner, Janet Charles, said, we need to write to the Home Office. And she did. Or in fact, we think she wrote to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, because the High Commissioners come under the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, as it was then called, wrote to them. And so we know that as early as 2014, 2015, they were on notice, because the Home Office always saying that when the scandal came to the public domain in 2018, they had no idea. And it's come about through changes in legislation that was aimed at keeping out Black and brown people from the UK. We now know that for a fact. We've got a massive report that the government tried to suppress. Information Commissioner was lobbied. An excellent campaigner took the matter to court, and the report of James Southern was released just a few months ago, which shows from the evidence available that the 1962-63 Commonwealth Immigration Acts and the 1971 Immigration Act were designed to reduce the numbers of Black people, so that's African heritage people, coming to the UK from the Caribbean and Africa. And I say brown people to describe people coming from mainly South Asia. It was absolutely designed to stop that. So the scandal broke. And of course, people were ringing me, because it's an immigration story. They were ringing me. So what do we do? What are we supposed to do? And we thought we'd hold a meeting. So we held a meeting in Brixton, in a place called Windrush Square, ironically, or coincidentally. And 1,000 of people turned up to this meeting, and the room that we had only held 50. So people were on the stairways, they were outside the building. It was just chaos. And my son was with me, and I remember saying, just tearing out sheets of paper from a notebook, saying, just take everyone, we're going to have to get back to people. We're going to have to get back to people. And that is how I came to be at the center of it, with hundreds and hundreds of people affected by it, working with them. lobbying government, sitting on various bodies to try and get the government to do the right thing, bringing cases to court, and we're still struggling. We have had some major successes. It's about obtaining evidence of what status people have, what immigration status, and that has been quite successful. There are some problem areas, and we are in court with some of those problem areas. The other thing has been compensation, individual compensation, and some of that has gone well and some of it has not, and we may well be in court with that. But overwhelmingly, the bit that's not been addressed at all is the aspect of reparations within the Windrush scandal. And I'm not talking about reparations for transatlantic enslavement, but how do you treat a community of people that you have invited in who were British subjects, who were all born before their countries were independent? Well, they're certainly the first generation of those who came. How do you treat them with such callous disregard? And now we know that racism played a major role, and you've not really done anything about that. There is such significant trauma ongoing in the community. The very scheme set up to help people re-traumatizes them, but it also traumatizes the rest of the community. Because as Black and brown people, particularly Black people of African heritage, I'm talking about myself, we suffer worst in nearly every measurement of index of attainment. So whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's access to finance to start businesses, whether it's housing, whether it's our dealings with the criminal justice system and the police, we suffer the worst indices. And the Windrush scandal, to me, is just part of that. And therefore, there needs to be some program of justice, reparatory or restorative justice for the community as a whole. And that has not even started.
Yes. You mentioned a name from, you said a Dominican, Janet?
Yes. Janet Charles. She's the acting High Commissioner of Dominica. She's been the acting High Commissioner for a very long number of years. She's still there. She's great. Absolutely brilliant. I'm not fully understood why she's still acting, but she's been there when we were doing those seminars, 2014, 15, 16. In fact, she hosted them at her beautiful High Commission in Collingham Gardens, which used to be the building that Grenada had its High Commission in during the Revolution until that was sold. That's another story. I might do a program on that one day. It was sold by a government, and it'd be interesting to find out a little bit more about that sale, I think, but that's for later. But yes, so those seminars were held at her High Commission under her auspices.
Okay, so coming out of all of this, you formed your own firm?
Yes. So I was at a firm called Bernberg Pierce, which is a big civil liberties firm. It's very known for big cases like, the miscarriages of justice that were meted out, some of the Irish, like Birmingham 4, the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4. It did quite a lot of work in the Black community. Today, its work is mostly around representing people who get caught up under terrorism legislation, that sort of thing. It has a small immigration department still. So I was there for 5 years, some of that as a trainee and then post-qualification. And then I just it's really interesting, actually, because I will write one day a lot about this, but some of these human rights firms, some of these big human rights firms are very much about let us do for you. You don't really see the development of Black people from the global majority South happening in some of those firms. And so anyway, I left and I set up what was like a small boutique immigration consultancy with myself and a partner. And we ran that for 10 years. And most of the work was actually falling on me. And Lee Day heard about me and they said, "You're crazy. How are you doing this?" And I was also working pro bono. I was not charging the Windrush clients. Some of them paid some small sums to get medical reports and so on. So there were some disbursements they paid for, but I worked pro bono. Nobody paid me. And it was difficult because there were hundreds, and I was also sitting on, various committees, organizations. Even the Home Office set up a stakeholder group and so forth to do with Windrush. It just took over my life. Windrush took over my life, and I was doing a lot of media and press work, even speaking abroad, going out into the community to find victims, because I know the Black community, particularly the Caribbean community in the UK, like no other. It's my family, it's my friends. I know where they are. I know where to find people who are victims of the Windrush scandal. Some of the places I found myself, I know some of these old fellas who came in the 50s and 60s and haven't bothered to get a piece of paper and are not bothering with it. And I knew exactly which betting shop or which pub or which church or which little alleyway to go and find them. And so it literally, the scandal became my life. And so Lide approached me, and I presented to them, and the rest is history. That's where I am now.
That's history you need to know, because before we go into Lide, so you would say that the Windrush litigation has substantially succeeded.
So not so much, there have been some litigation that has succeeded, but most of it is the schemes. So you're dealing with schemes and you're putting forward applications to these schemes, sometimes difficult ones, for evidence of what immigration status people have. And also you're making claims to another scheme for compensation. And that's quite arduous, difficult work, because the Home Office, and where we are at war with them, is that they still expect people, even though the burden of proof is the civil standard, and remember, some of this evidence goes back decades, they're still expecting people to have copious amounts of evidence. And so we are at war. There has been some litigation on both the status side and the compensation side, and some of that has been successful, some of it unfortunately hasn't been successful. We've just had a case that wasn't successful, and we've applied for leave to the Court of Appeal. I do believe ultimately, I think the judgment's perverse, so I do believe ultimately that will be successful too. But 90% of what we do is through the scheme, working to the scheme, and there has been some really good results from that.
But I guess the schemes, correct me if I'm wrong, came about because the state recognized that, look, there were people who were spearheading this work, people who understood the law, understood the remedies that people were entitled to, and it will end up in litigation if they didn't take action.
Oh, absolutely. And they do listen to us. So I've given evidence to Parliament, I've given evidence to the Home Affairs Committee, and each time we've given evidence to a body, we've ended up with some improvements to the scheme. The scheme is continually being refined. We come across new scenarios sometimes. We threaten legal action, we take legal action, and sometimes the government listens, sometimes they don't. But you're absolutely right. The fact that there are lawyers peering down on this means that there have been some measures of success that I don't think there would have been otherwise.
Okay, good. And even before we go to Lide, I can mention your role also in terms of the matter in Grenada here with the flogging, the challenge to the flogging that was successful.
Yeah, well, I had a very tiny role, really. You came to a colleague, or I introduced you rather to a colleague of mine from Bernberg's, actually. There's some great people at Bernberg's. And I introduced you to a colleague. We looked at it. I remember we were on the phone for hours looking at some of the material. And then the rest was done by you guys, really. And congratulations. Yes. What an incredible victory. Difficult to believe that was still on the statute books. And that was still a possibility in this day and age. These things that come directly from the period of enslavement. So a great victory for you guys.
Yes, and of course, Jerry Edward, Ruggles Ferguson from the Grenada Bar.
Yes.
They played the critical roles there, and also King's Counsel Edward Fitzgerald, Amanda Matthews from the UK, and Parvez Jabbar. And of course, we
Yes,
have to be
Parvez.
also talking
Yes,
about
all great names. And we're now working with Ed actually on reparations. And Parvez, we've worked with a lot over the years,
right.
particularly
So,
on the
so
case
Ed
of the
is on the
Grenada
reparations.
17. Yes, yes.
Okay, so tell us about Lee now. Tell us something about Lee, because my understanding that when I heard some of the figures in terms of the size of Lee, I mean, it was I staggered. So Lee is one of the larger firms in England, right?
Oh, there are larger. Oh gosh, there are some huge law firms in the
Oh my
UK and
goodness.
some American ones. Leaday's got about 1,000 people in it, just over 1,000, and about a third are lawyers. It's about a third lawyers, third paralegals, and then we have a huge, support staff, secretaries, finance, marketing, all that sort of thing. Maybe a little bit more than a third are lawyers. About 60 of us are partners. It's a great firm. Interestingly, it started in 1987. And despite the fact that it's now this huge firm, quasi-city firm in London, with offices all over the country now, and hopefully soon outside the country, it started in 1987, and its first area of work was immigration. People don't know that. So its firm's called Lee Day, and Sarah Lee, that was her interest, immigration. And I actually remember her, because I thought, who's this woman? I remember her. I think I was still a student, going around trying to fight the government. They were being really discriminatory, particularly to Asian people who were trying to bring their spouses over. They didn't believe them, didn't believe their children were their children, didn't believe people were virgins. They had this awful thing that you had to do this virginity test. And that was her area of work. So it's really interesting. And then they didn't. I mean, immigration is not the most profitable area of work. Lee Day, I suppose, very quickly realized that. It continued to do public law coming out. So it would judicially review the government all the time, nonstop, all day, all night, on anything. And that cuts across immigration, but it wouldn't handle first instance stuff. And so I've brought back first instance work to Lee Day in 2021 after an absence of 30-something years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it's a great firm, and it's known for a lot of its international work. It takes on the giants like Shell. We just last week had an agreement to settle a case in Kenya where tea workers were sexually harassed. Our most famous case was getting reparations for the Mau Mau tribespeople in Kenya. And we work all over the world doing this sort of work.
And the Mau Mau, if we could just get a bit of it, was basically the war against the British?
Yes, it was the mistreatment. Yes, it was the mistreatment. Yes, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And I was in Kenya 2 years ago, and when you touch down on that soil and you hear the stories firsthand from people with lived experience, that's really when you get to understand the evil that the British government, in some instances, perpetuated against people across its so-called empire. Both during periods of enslavement and since then through the colonial era and even now. So it's an amazing victory. I mean, there was a second Mau Mau case which was not as successful as the first one, and there is ongoing work there. I'm involved in some work in Kenya. I'm looking at some Kenyans who are mixed heritage, who are the product of rape. But they're not. There've been a few of these cases knocking around before, and this is a slightly different one because these were agricultural farm workers. There's a whole argument as to whether the relationships were consensual and whether there's some horror there because some people say the women were sex workers. I don't know. I'm in the reconnaissance stage of it, but the people who are, the beneficiaries of this are absolutely adamant of their narrative, and I believe them. And so we'll be doing some research And the research isn't so much about compensation, although that may come. It's really about, are they British and should they be given British citizenship?
Okay. Understood. So let me just a little aside, but very much related. As someone who lived in Britain for many years, way back, said to me that 50 years ago they could not imagine a Rishi Sunak becoming prime minister, followed by Ms. Badenoch becoming the leader of the opposition Conservative Party. What would have brought about that?
Ooh, I don't know how much time have we got, because that requires like a whole afternoon, you know.
We just going to the reparations, so just a few minutes I need.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, really, because it is fascinating that the Conservatives, who are centre-right party, even though they've now adopted some really right-wing policies, have actually thrown up black and brown leaders, you know, and a prime minister. I mean, he didn't win an election, so he became a prime minister by default. I do think it will be difficult, as we saw with Kamala Harris. I do think it will be difficult for a black and brown person to win at the polls in the UK. I could be wrong. Kemi Badenoch herself is elected by a small number of members of the Conservative Party. So those things don't tell us a great deal, but there are some interesting optics there, because how is it that this party, which throws up more, and I don't want to be too partisan about it, I don't want to get your program into any trouble, but it does tend to throw up more racists. How is it that they've had all these senior black and brown people, and we haven't really seen that in the Labour Party? In fact, the Labour Party has not even had a woman leader yet, and they're supposed to be the party of the proletariat. So there are those contradictions. Kemi Badenoch herself is an interesting character. I mean, she's a brand. There's a whole lot of them around the world, isn't there? There's a whole lot of them in the US who do these media programs, and we've got quite a few of them in the UK. And they've pitched themselves almost as a business to be controversial, to be on the right, because the media loves it. They make money out of it. They ascend out of it. She's ascended to the leadership of the Conservative Party. I don't know what her true beliefs are. Completely hypocritical. Talks about migrants. We shouldn't have migrants. You know, too many are coming. Her own mother came to the UK to give birth to her. So there's all these really awful, I mean, she talks about an a-racial society. There's no such thing as structural racism or institutional racism. Absolute bonkers. All the evidence is there in her face. I don't necessarily criticize her too much openly. I think it's interesting that a black woman's in that position. I don't necessarily subscribe to things purely on the basis of race. I am quite left in my thinking. And I think class and class interests trump race sometimes as in these battles. But it is interesting to me that there was a black woman there. And a lot of us, the morning after the election, a lot of us in various WhatsApp groups and so just didn't know what to say about it, really. But she hasn't helped her case amongst us. She's not a friend of ours. She criticizes us openly. I've had one engagement with her, which was a pleasant engagement, actually, when she wrote some nonsense about Britain being a racial society, and I wrote to her, she wrote back. I think she's interesting, she's bright, but I understand why she wants to peddle so much hate. And I do think for the Conservatives, if they want to win an election, they may well do so, because unfortunately our current government seems to be falling in the opinion polls quite rapidly over a number of things, but various domestic policies around benefits and around winter fuel allowances and anti-poverty measures, but also because of international things like Gaza and Palestine. So they're falling. So the Conservatives may well find themselves in a better place, although they've got hot on their heels as an ultra right-wing party called Reform. So it's really problematic for all the parties, really. But I think for her to ever stand a chance, she will have to lose some of the nonsense, the right-wing vitriol. That's not what the country wants. And it's not what the UK is about.
Okay. Someone is saying, Martin Felix is saying that Elon Musk has just declared he pledged to give Nigel Farage's party millions like he gave Trump to have Farage become a contender for prime minister in the next election. We don't need to go into it, but he's just making the point.
I missed the first bit of that. Who's given Farage that?
Elon Musk.
Oh,
Elon Musk. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yes, he probably got the election for Trump, didn't he? We're in some difficult times. Times. Farage is not a real politician. He's another brand. He stood in one of the poorest constituencies in the UK, an area called Clacton, against a young man called Jovan Owusu Napol, a young Caribbean, a man of Caribbean descent, who stood for Labour. He stood for reform, and he's not been back to the constituency. He does not give a hoot. He does not care about the constituency. He was recently taken to task about it, and he said his security advised him not to go. But you've just won the seat. You've just won the seat. So how much at risk are you? Don't the people love you if you just won the seat?
Who won the seat? Farage won there?
Farage won the seat. He's in Parliament. There are four of them. There are four members of that party in Parliament. He's one of them.
Okay, good. So to go back now to Lee Day. So you are part at Lee Day. You spearhead the immigration work mostly yourself, and Lee Day has a role in the reparations movement, and you have been appointed as the lead person on that issue.
Yes. So I'm head of immigration and asylum. We sit in the Human Rights Department, and we do mostly immigration asylum, hundreds of Windrush cases, as well as everything, deportations, cases dealing with human rights issues, asylum, cases that have come out of the Brexit era and problems. And unlawful detention, people who are put in immigration detention unlawfully. So we have a massive range of cases dealing with almost anything that you can imagine. But we also touch on things. We also have a small portfolio of cases in discrimination, actions against the police. And that's the sort of thing that I like doing. So I've sort of brought some of that work into the team. So we're kind of multifaceted, but our main role is immigration asylum. Now, in 2013, Lee Day was instructed by CARICOM and came to the region. Martin Day, who's a senior partner at Lee Day, came to the Caribbean. Interestingly, with a man called Richard Hermer, who's now the Attorney General in the Labour government, and a great friend of Lee Day. So they came down and met with people like Kamala Prasad, who's leading Trinidad and Tobago at the time, and Ralph Gonzalez, St. Vincent, who's still there. And other leaders, I can't remember who all the other leaders were, but those two are the main ones anyway. And talked to Lee Day about reparations in light of their success for the Mau Mau in Kenya, and helped them with the 10-point plan, the CARICOM 10-point plan. And what we are doing at the moment, Lee Day, we're not formally instructed by CARICOM, but we are working very closely with various individuals. And I'm going to be in Barbados next week. It's a conference on the UN conference on the year of the African decade. But we'll be looking at reparations. And I have met some leaders now. And it's difficult. Reparations is really difficult because you've got various. So, for instance, Grenada has got this amazing opportunity with the Bank of England, because the Bank of England has said, they've put out this exhibition and they've said, yes, we enslaved people in St. David's in 2 areas. And I know Grenada's written to the Bank of England. The Bank of England's basically written back to them, not necessarily in the spirit of how these things ought to be done at the moment. And so, we need to look at whether Grenada should be doing things like that, or should Grenada be working through its CARICOM, its reparations commission, which has got one led by a great guy called Ali Gill, who has been doing this work. And then there's the overall CRC, the CARICOM Reparations Commission run by another great guy, Sir Hilary Beckles. And it's all coming together. And CARICOM at the moment are actually looking again at the 10-point plan. You probably know what's in the 10-point plan, so I don't have to go through that. Can if you want to. But they're looking at that again. And I think that's really good, because you can see some areas that can be expanded upon and some things that can be added now that we've had much more knowledge. It is over 11 years old, the 10-point plan. And we have been having roundtables with experts. We've been talking to lawyers, including Ed Fitzgerald. We've had several meetings with him. We've had discussions with Lord Anthony Gifford, who's written one of the foremost papers on reparations. And we're wanting to work again with CARICOM. I'm leading for LEADE on reparations, and we're wanting to resume our work just to help with some of the negotiations. The difficulty we've got is everyone's saying, and the activists are saying, and we must remember the activists, because the activists, including the Rastafari, have been running this reparations campaign now for decades. We mustn't leave them out of the observance of how we got here. But there's this fervor for it, but there's also a fervor to sue. And to sue who, and for who, and in which court is a conundrum. And we've seen some really dreadful things happen recently. We saw the Tulsa, the victims, there are still living victims of the Tulsa massacre in the US. We saw them lose their case this year in the Supreme Court. And I'm just going to, just look at my notes just to give you the correct name of the Supreme Court, Oklahoma. I always say Ohio when I'm giving this speech, but it's the Oklahoma Supreme Court. I didn't want to get that wrong. And they lost that case, and there are living survivors. It tells you how difficult it's going to be, where there's scope for discretion for judges to be on our side, I think. We similarly saw France's highest court, the Court of Cassation, rule against Guadeloupe last year in a case brought for reparations. So whereas there are a number of us who are quite interested, and we're working on drafting documents and researching how we might seek an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. We are also looking at those countries in the CARICOM region that are still British territories, whether they might have actions in the domestic courts. Similarly, those countries that still have Britain as their last court, the Privy Council. Jamaica itself was looking at really potentially petitioning the Privy Council, because there's this whole defense that slavery was lawful. We now believe we've gotten around that and can deal with that quite well. But Jamaica, in order to get to the Privy Council, would have to petition the king, and it's believed because he's made positive soundings about reparations and wanting to look at the royal family's history. I don't really think he has to do much looking, it's all there. But nevertheless, he said he wants to look at his family's history. Because of all of that, we think it will be it'd be difficult for him not to accede to the request for this to go to the Privy Council to obtain an advisory on whether slavery was lawful or not. And that goes back to the 1660s with those slave codes mostly emanating in Barbados. So the legal thing is complex, but there's a whole group of us sitting down, poring over it, working on it. I've got a great team who are doing quite a lot of work and finding some really, really interesting stuff. I've been looking at the compensation that was paid by the Central Powers, so the Allied powers, both after World War I and World War II, billions in today's money. We've also, after World War II, again, Germany had to pay Allied countries, including what was then the Soviet Union, and also had to pay money to the Holocaust survivors, and have only just stopped paying that in 2005. So there's all sorts of precedents that we can look at. But really and truly, we have to first, before we do any of that, is try to ascertain what exactly is reparations. Who should get it? Should governments receive it? Where is the voice of the masses and the community? How are they going to benefit from this? If this money comes into governments, is it just going to go on recurrent expenditure or debt settlement? Will people's lives change in any way? The 10-point plan, CARICOM's 10-point plan, created by the CRC, the CARICOM Reparations Commission, is actually quite holistic in that it does talk about psychological programs, education programs, debt forgiveness, cultural exchanges, restitution of artifacts. And so it deals with lots of things that could happen. But one aspect of reparations may well be monetary compensation. It may not be that, but it may well be that. And if it is that, who gets it? What do they do with it? How does it really repair? Because that's what reparations is. Reparations is meant to repair. A wrong was done. Nobody denies that that wrong was done. There are some detractors who try to say, but it was lawful then. Well, we say it wasn't. But that aside, a wrong was done. Everyone else who've suffered, Japanese prisoners of war are another example, have had reparations. Why is it that people balk at the idea of paying reparations to people of African heritage in the Caribbean, possibly in Africa, in the Americas, and possibly to the diaspora? Why is it? Why are we the only group of people who shouldn't get reparations? And you've even got, unfortunately, our own Labour government, and as we saw in Samoa at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which took place just last month. Our Labour government, we are so hopeful. But anyway, our Labour government, Keir Starmer and our Foreign Secretary David Lammy, we're not paying reparations. They won't pay reparations. We have to make them pay it. In the same way, I always tell people to read Richard Hart's book, the late Richard Hart, great historian, Jamaican historian, worked in Grenada as the Attorney General during the Revolution, great man. And he wrote this book, The Slaves Who Abolished Slavery. And I think we need to revisit that sort of thinking. You need mass movements. And I think the CRCs and the commissions in each country are great things. But we also need mass movements, because it's only through mass movements and activism, underpinned by, the research and the intellectual stuff and so on, are we going to get reparations? I'm going to give it to you. So when you hear Starmer and Lammy and so carrying on, they did that with Windrush. I mean, Theresa May, where did I get Thatcher from? Theresa May initially said, when the Windrush scandal broke, wasn't even going to apologize, and says, it was before her time. Nothing to do with her. And by coincidence, the Caribbean leaders happened to be in London that April 2018 for the same CHOGM that's just taken place in Samoa. It was a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Keith Mitchell was there, and Andrew Holness was there. And Andrew Holness made this amazing speech. And that was very interesting that he made this speech, because, the Jamaica Labour Party is a centre-right party. It's an ally of the Conservative Party, but he was not having it. He said, you will apologise and you will create schemes of restitution. And so said, so done. So we need our leaders in the Caribbean to be equally bold and equally outspoken, and to pull the people along with them in the way they did with Windrush to make sure reparations happen, because no one's going to give it to us. We've got to get it.
Okay, so before we proceed further, Jackie, I just want us to take a minute of full break just to recognize the sponsors: Jail Professional Solutions, Jim FM carrying this program on FM radio in Canada, and Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Yes, so we let's just take a few comments from the chat here. Wow, what is happening there? Jomo Thomas is saying, I am delighted you are on this reparations team. Very clear, very clear. Sorry, I'm having a few technical issues. 1 minute, please. What's happening? Yes, I'm very excited on the issues. Cyrus Griffith is asking, do you think the CCJ can be used as a court to make a determination regarding whether or not reparations should be paid? That's, I guess we have spoken a lot about the CCJ on the program, and he's asking that.
Well, I mean, I think the defendant's not likely to be someone with, I don't think the jurisdiction will apply, really. The defendants are in Europe, really, aren't they? I mean, and I go on about the UK because I'm based in the UK, but we are looking at other European territories too. Certainly CARICOM will be looking at other territories, France, Spain, Italy. And we have seen some of the leaders in some of those countries make some positive soundings about reparations. I mean, we saw, the Dutch leader unfortunately, he then lost the election, and the person who's taken over has kind of gone back, reneged, But I think the time has come. We have seen churches, universities, banks, other financial institutions like insurance companies, the big ones like Lloyd's Shipping and so on. All these organizations have become unjustly enriched by effectively working our ancestors to death, torturing them, having kidnapped them from Africa. And somebody now needs to pay for that.
Let me ask, is there any consideration, I'm certain there is, to seeking to strike up an alliance with the Black community in the United States and North America?
Yes, that is already happening.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that is already happening, certainly with the UK. And last week, not last week, there's so much going on, it's all so fast moving. But last month at Lee Day, we had a roundtable on reparations with leading experts. And it included voices and people represented from Africa, but it also included people from the United States.
Yes, just give me a minute, please. We're having a few technical issues. Yes. If you just repeat that, please. I missed it.
No, we are in touch with people who are working on reparations. I mean, we've been speaking to the lawyers on the Tulsa case. There are community activists. There are NGOs. There is quite a movement for reparations in the US. I mean, unfortunately for them, with Trump at the helm, I think they're going to see significant setbacks, but that doesn't deter them in any way. This is a struggle that has to continue. It's a struggle that has to be won. But we are in touch. And I was saying that we hosted a roundtable of leading experts on reparations last month at Lee Day. And we had representation there from the US.
Okay. Yes. Jumbo Thomas is saying only through mass mobilization and activism, unity and organization will reparations for genocide and slavery be won.
Yes, I agree with that. Absolutely. We've got to take the message out to the people. We've got to interest communities across our countries, the CARICOM countries, and in the diaspora. We've got to interest them in this reparations movement and quest.
In terms of Lee Day, if you can, you also had a case from Colombia?
Yes, so we've had cases, we've got cases all over the world, actually. But yes, we have actually had cases in Latin America. Yes, usually to do with oils, but a lot of our work is about how oil spills or sewage pollution or other environmental problems affect the lives of people. And,
Yes,
and usually the defendant is a British company, so that's the jurisdiction.
Oh, so usually depend okay.
Yeah.
So you yes. Yes, Jackie. There's been quite a bit, and I know that from the chat here, those who have viewed find this program very informative. And I don't know if you want to add any things. If you
Well,
have
I
any
can't
other.
see the chat, sadly, but hopefully I can. It's usually there afterwards, isn't it? It'd be nice to see what people are saying. And there might be, people have so many wonderful ideas and helpful ideas about how we run this reparations battle and struggle. And so hopefully I can get some learning from what people are saying already. There's been a few things that you've said from the comments and what you've said yourself. And I hope to now go around the region. I'm here. That's what I'm here partly for, to go around the region and talk to people. And whilst we're doing this reconnaissance work, just try and work out how do we build movements. There are some organizations out there, there are some funders out there who want to support movement building, capacity building. And then, of course, there's the formal work that the governments do. There'll be the formal work that lawyers do. All of that will come under the CARICOM Reparations Commission, and they lead on this, and they've done a great job leading on it. But there's lots of different things to be done, and various ones of us will have different roles. And so I'm trying to put together a sort of blueprint of what we can all do to make this happen. And both at a sort of macro level of CARICOM in unity, but also there may be some individual things that I get approached. I get approached by people all the time now because I speak on reparations quite a bit. And, you know, I get people who say to me, I'm a descendant of so-and-so, you know, this family. I can prove it. I can prove that I'm a descendant. And it's interesting. This is a really interesting thing because, you know, where the Bank of England have identified their estates, I think that the people who live there now are likely to be direct descendants of people who are enslaved, because it's not one of those communities where there's been much mobility, apart from people from some of those more impoverished communities would have left and gone to England as part of Windrush and that sort of thing, or gone to Trinidad and Venezuela and so on. And I don't know where, I mean, I have all these kind of crazy ideas because I take the thinking quite deeply, but I don't know where the ancestors are buried. The ancestors who are enslaved are buried. But I'm almost certain if there are cemeteries in those areas and you were to do some DNA testing, you'd probably find direct descendants still living in those communities, in those areas. Mm-hmm. And because there's always this big thing, isn't there? Well, who are the defendants? You know, who are the defendants? Although in Tulsa, you had defendants and it still made absolutely no difference at all. You know, they just disregarded them. You know, a woman's 103 years old, went to court and lost. Absolutely shocking. You know, all the evidence was there. Because these cases are, I mean, you're a lawyer too. These cases are half and half, aren't they? You know, you can go that way, you can go the other way. In so much of what we do, cases can go, I mean, it's with the scales. You know, you're trying to push more stuff into your scale to kind of, you know, bring it down in your favor. But very often they're finely tuned. You know, I do a lot of work that's finely tuned. And I do think that to overcome the worry that judges will have about floodgates, but also some of the prejudices that some judges have, because the judges are still coming from a particular demographic and suit of people. I hope I don't get into any trouble with my regulators for saying that, but, you know, particularly in the UK, maybe in the CARICOM, CARICOM region is slightly different, but in the UK, there isn't much diversity amongst our judiciary. And people will have in mind, you know, the floodgates. I mean, Britain says it's impoverished, and it certainly operates as though it's impoverished. You know, we've got 3 million children in poverty. We've got pensioners. I mean, our temperatures at the moment are sub-zero, and there are pensioners who will not put their heating on. So they're at risk of dying of hypothermia and other illnesses because they cannot pay their fuel bills. I mean, the prices of food in Grenada has just really shocked me. Yesterday, I paid $12 for 6 or 7 tiny tomatoes, and I'm still in shock about that. However, the food prices in England are also high. All our bills are high. And people just can't make ends meet, you know. We've had austerity programs which have cut social service provision to the bone. So Britain has problems, but Britain is still the 5th or 6th largest economy, depending on which measure you use for this. It has huge reserves. It has managed to find billions for Ukraine. It's managed to find billions for Israel. So it's priorities. It's about priorities. And I am not prepared for anyone to say to me, you're British. And they do say this to me when I do radio phone-ins and so on. If somebody rings up and says, but you're British, why are you saying that we should pay reparations when we ourselves are impoverished? Well, we're impoverished because we choose to be, right? The CARICOM regions, Black people in diaspora, Black people in the Americas, etc., including Latin America, are impoverished because of the transatlantic period of enslavement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Jomo is asking, what kind of advice would you offer to young attorneys who want to get into this kind of work? I guess you mean reparations work.
Well, if they want to pay their bills and they're in the Caribbean, it might be a bit difficult because there isn't a case. There isn't a real case. So there isn't somebody who's going to pay you in the Caribbean. So, I mean, of course, it'd be interesting to find out how CARICOM is going to do this. Are they going to put together panels of lawyers and so forth? Are they going to fund lawyers to do things? We don't know yet. But I think it's difficult. I think in one sense, it's really quite sad that to do this sort of work, you've either already got to have something or have another means, and it's like human rights work all over the world is often done by people who can afford to do it. And that is not great. But if there is a young lawyer who's really, really interested in reparations work, I'd be happy to have a chat with them.
So let me ask you, if in line with something you said earlier, if a lawyer can get someone who can establish beyond reasonable doubt that they are a descendant, that the person, he or she is a descendant of somebody who worked on one of the estates as a slave, that the bank was operated by the Bank of England, would that person have standing to bring a case against the Bank of England?
I think they would have standing. I think they would absolutely have standing. And that is this whole issue, isn't it? It is about standing.
Mm-hmm. Judy Davis is asking, first of all, Barbara Andrews says, do you think that there is enough awareness of the local community, in the local communities, I guess, at least in England, about the reparations?
No, I don't think there's sufficient awareness anywhere. So there have been in those who are affected by reparations, there's been an annual march now for a couple of decades on the 1st of August through London. It's gone from Downing Street, which is the home of the Prime Minister, to Brixton, which is where traditionally there was a large African Caribbean community. It's kind of become gentrified and changed a little bit since, but it still has that demographic. So there's been this annual march and there've been meetings. It is still very much, dare I say, the chattering classes, groups of lawyers, the groups of community activists. The Rastafari have been brilliant, as I said previously. MPs, national parliamentary group on reparations run very well by Belle Ribeiro Addy, who's a great MP for Brixton and Clapham. She was Streatham, which her constituency has just changed. And so there is work being done. There's a couple of people doing PhDs, there's some academics. The media has become interested. The media's become interested in it because we've had all sorts of initiatives. So you had the heirs of slavery, the Trevelyan family, come to Grenada and make their apology, and they gave some money to your Reparations Commission, and that got a lot of coverage. The Church of England has recently said, yeah, we know we made some money from enslavement. Well, we could have told them that. But anyway, they've set aside some money. Then we've had the Bank of England. Universities, Glasgow University said they'd give some money to UE. All sorts of people are coming out of the woodwork saying that we are sorry and we'd like to give and so forth. Now, that's not necessarily reparations in my mind. That's more donations and goodwill. And that's all great. and welcoming, but that's not necessarily reparations in the true sense of the word. So it'd be churlish to sit down and disregard what those people are doing. It has a place, but it isn't reparations. Reparations are a much bigger thing than that. But it has a place, and I think the only way to achieve reparations is to be working in partnership with all the protagonists and the antagonists to get it done.
Yes, Jomo is asking, are you concerned as someone directly involved with the CARICOM effort for reparatory justice, where former beneficiaries of slaves and slave trade are not offered what they think should be repaid?
So that's almost in the last answer I just gave. What they're doing, these families and organizations and institutions who were unjustly enriched by kidnapping Africans and, and working them to death and torturing them, and now having their descendants, which is all of us, with all these, awful indicators of deprivation, health indicators including, what they're doing by atoning and apologizing and giving sums of money is goodwill and is a donation. It's a contribution. It is not reparations. I think that's the way to see it. Does that mean, therefore, that they are not part of the reparations discourse? Of course they are. They're there. They've put their head above the parapet. I've met the Trevelyan's, the Downers, Alex Renton, and to me, they are genuine people really wanting to atone, wanting to do something. So I think it'd be churlish for us to disregard them entirely. But I think we do have to demarcate what they're doing from reparations.
Okay, as an aside, a bit different. Someone is asking Judy Davis, how can we get help from your firm on getting our money back in the OECS countries lost by investments with CLICO? No reparations from TT government.
Well, I don't think we've got any jurisdiction.
Also.
I don't think we've got any jurisdiction over the defendants there, but we're a defendant. We're so I was just reading the questions because they were flashing up on the screen. Yeah, no, I don't think we've got any jurisdiction. I followed CLICO, and I actually know some of the lawyers who've been involved in this. But I don't think that Lide, there'd have to be a British company involved in this somehow. If there is a British company involved in it, then do let us know.
That could be done. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't be my area of specialism, but of all the lawyers there's somebody who might want to take a look at it. But I think because a friend's mum is one of the lawyers very involved from Trinidad and Tobago, and I think I've heard enough about it to know that it's not likely to touch on the UK at all.
Yeah, but it's an issue that have affected many people in these parts.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's awful, absolutely awful. Yeah. Mm.
Yes, the program last week really dealt with that.
Yes, I heard that. Yeah, I was in the audience last week. I heard that. Brilliant program. Yeah,
it's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah,
for people in the OECS.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Let me see if I have a question myself. Yes. So I gather you to be saying that the importance, well, not important, it's one pathway is finding in many of these actions are English form that could be a defendant. Then you can get it in the English system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Lide, there's some lawyers that are up for a challenge, all the time. We're a fighting firm. Okay. Yeah, so we are a claimant firm. We take on the biggest and the worst, and we often win.
Yeah, Martin Stroud is asking what level of support are the trade unions in the UK, US, and the wider Caribbean contributing towards the reparations struggle?
I'm not sure about Caribbean, but certainly in the US and the UK. So the trade unions have an annual reparations conference, and they give resources and space and time to discuss reparations. There's some great trade unionists who have emerged in the UK. Certainly there. It is still mainly African Caribbean heritage trade unionists themselves who are leading this in small caucus. So I wouldn't say it is across the trade union movement, and the trade union movement in the UK is beleaguered in my mind. It's certainly not the same trade union movement that we all knew from the heady days of the 70s and 80s and even the 90s, when there were some major struggles fought and won. It's a very different movement, mainly because legislation has caused so many problems with your right to protest and picket and strike and so on. And particularly your right to strike. So it's problematic, but there are some great activists in some of the trade unionists in the UK and in the US, because I've been in touch with a couple who are doing things. I haven't really heard much from the trade union movement in the Caribbean. So if there's anybody listening in from one of the trade unions, perhaps there's something that ought to be picked up on.
Right. Actually, one of the sponsors of the program is
Taos. I heard that. Yes, I just
hopefully
heard
that will be a point of entry.
Yes.
Bob Marisha was asking from the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya of the 50s. Did they get reparations from United Kingdom?
Yes, that's the. Hi, Bob. Bob's actually my cousin. Actually, it's good to see him on here. Yes, yes, they did. He probably wasn't at the start of the program, but yes, they did. From our firm. Our firm achieved that. Lee Day.
And Jomo again is saying, Dr. Hilary Becker says the 21st century will be the century of reparatory justice. Do you have that same level of confidence? And if so, what drives your hope?
What drives my hope is that the antagonists are nervous, they're worried, they know the time has come. It's why you have so many institutions also running ahead and saying, well, we'll give you this, hoping that that will be the end of the story for those institutions, but it won't. It's just the start of the story. I think reparations will take decades, and it should take decades. But what I am optimistic about is that it will be taken seriously, and we'll start to see blueprints and maybe some benefit within our lifetime. But I think really we're building a movement for reparations to really benefit our children and grandchildren and their children.
Don Smith is happy, says it's interesting to have some updates on the matter which appeared dormant for a while. So I guess your appearance here and speaking on it directly in terms of your work and the work of your firm is received as an update, and welcome.
Yeah, but there's been some great people in the region. I don't know much about the trade unionists, but Jomo in St. Vincent has done so much work on reparations. And it's really funny because whilst I'm digging down into archives, and thanks to the net, you find all sorts of things. I see his name everywhere. Ali Gill here in Grenada, David Comerjon in Barbados, Vereen Shepherd and Hilary Brown in Jamaica, and others, amazing people who have been at this for decades. And I think it's great that we've got somewhere and we owe it to them.
Dobrin, there's a Dobrin something, I forgot the name of a minute, from Antigua. He's the leader of the reparation committee there. He appeared on this program
I've just recently been introduced to Antigua, so I don't know everybody yet, but the High Commissioner has just linked me to some people there, so I will be meeting with them.
And also Bud Samuel, who is a well-known lawyer in Jamaica. I think it is recognized that he was a reparation advocate before it became popular. And
as I said, the first reparations advocates were the Rastafari movements. People in the Rastafari movements, and there are some people like Lord Anthony Gifford and so who always give them their credit, but we can't forget them. In fact, I'm half Jamaican, and I remember, listening to Jamaicans talk about, rastas and so on, and talk about reparations many, many moons ago. We all thought they were mad. We're not going to get this. They're never going to pay this, and here I am today, wanting to be part of this whole movement, legal or otherwise, to make it happen.
Yes, and it's just pointed out all Brewski heads the movement in St. Lucia. And the name that was eluded me is Dobrin Omani from Antigua.
Oh, Omani. Yes. Omani. Yes, definitely. Yes. Yeah. There's loads. I mean, it's always dangerous when you start saying names because there's so many people.
Indeed.
They haven't been called.
He appeared on this program on that issue,
okay.
Along with Bert Samuels.
Yeah, well, Bert Samuels, yes, well known. Yeah. I mean, there's some great. One of the things the Caribbean's got is some great lawyers. It'd be nice. I mean, yes, Lide is a British firm. It'd be nice to work in cahoots with some of the great lawyers that are in the region. They get major victories in many things, and we need that intellect as part of this work.
Yes. Albert Pascal says, I think that message, meaning the reparation message, should be directed to the schools all over in terms of education. Solidarity from unions and the masses in general.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, because all the unions, perhaps what some of the families are doing, some of these big institutions who are saying, well, look, yes, sorry, we benefited and we want to help. They could put resources. It's not necessarily legal work, but NGO work maybe, or community activism. They could be putting resources into spreading this word and building capacity. We talk about building capacity. I recently had a meeting with some funders, and one of the things we want to look at is how can we, of course, we have to be led by the reparations commissions in each country and by the CRC across CARICOM, and we can't just go and do anything. But one of the things we want to suggest is some capacity building to get some momentum amongst the people.
Yes. So before we end, Jackie, and before I invite you to give closing comments, I just want to once again recognize the sponsors: Jail Professional Solutions, JMFM carrying this program on FM radio in Canada, and also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, GTAU.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Yes, Jackie, any closing comments?
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for putting this really important topic on the agenda. There needs to be much more of this, much more debate about reparations. It is one of the most important things. It's linked with so many issues, including climate justice. Just the other night, you and I were both at a talk held by the Grenada Bar Association, the Sir Archibald Ned lecture, where Dr. Spencer Thomas spoke about whether small states can survive. And the scenario and the data looks like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's real. We are a threat. And reparations could probably help address some of the issues that we are likely to be facing. It is true that small nations are having to bear the brunt disproportionately for the chaos and the crisis caused by the industrialized nations. They've developed themselves. And now they're saying to small nations, well, you can't develop, you mustn't use fossil fuel. I mean, we look at Guyana as an example of that. And Africa, Africa contributes so little to carbon emissions, but yet is told to stop building factories and becoming industrial. And so how do we develop? How do these countries that were made poor, as Walter Rodney said, how do we develop in the face of climate justice, things like pandemics, increased poverty, a movement to the right across Europe and other industrialized nations, and now in the States? How are we as CARICOM nations going to fare in all of this as small states in this massive wheel of the world that's in a really bad place at the moment, whether it's war or famine or the things we've just spoken about, like climate justice, and what role or reparations to pay in addressing some of this and ensuring that we survive. I think that's why reparations is crucial now more than ever before, but it's also crucial because it's owed to us. It's not a gift. It's a bit like when Windrush compensation is being paid out and you get some right-wing ghastly journalists saying, these people are tired talking about money. No, we're not tired talking about money because it's owed. You're not giving us a grant or a gift. You're giving us something that's owed. You're putting people back into the position they would have been were it not for. And that's what reparations is about.
Yes. So, Jackie, thank you so much for appearing tonight on tonight's program. As I said at the start, this is the last program for the year. We have successfully navigated 1 year of Legalize. It's in 2 seasons, a long season which ran from January to end of July. I was only interrupted by the Hurricane Beryl. Then we started in September, and we are here now, the last program. We start back next year. We really hope that next year we can even improve on certainly the presentation. We had some awesome guests this year, including yourself, of course. We will have to see if we can get some sponsorship for the program. Not massive sums, just to keep it going as a public education program platform that people can engage issues which, as one, but in fact more than one person said to me that you don't find in the mainstream media, certainly in Grenada, you don't find them there. And I really want to thank all the guests who have appeared during the year. I want to thank the sponsors, Gel Professional Solutions, once again, Gem FM, Tau, and all those who have assisted in whatever way. I want to give a special thank you to Bentley Wilfred. You don't see him. He's the person who ensures that the program, when he does all the promos, he prepares everything, quite impressive. He's not really remunerated for it, so I hope we can put that right next year because he has been doing a fantastic work. I'm hoping that we can add a calling facility so we can have greater engagement and we can spread the word a bit more. That we can have maybe, hopefully, if I can have a few co-hosts to assist with the program, I think all of this will add interest. I want to also especially thank the viewers, all those who have been here for the last year on a Sunday night this time. Thank you so much. It was really my pleasure to be the main host, I will say. I've had some co-hosts in recent times. It was my pleasure being the main host of this program and adding a little value to the public discourse. So thank you all. Thank you very, very much. I must say thank you especially to my family, also who have supported me, to my wife who is always there, supported me in ensuring that this program takes place, and to my family in the US also who follow and encourage me. Thank you to everyone, and good night. See you next year.
Before you go, can I just say one final thing? Can we thank you, because you had the foresight to put this program together, and I've been in the audience for many of these programs, and they have been so informative and brilliant. So can we thank you too?
Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, good night. Bye.